Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today I'm recording live from the Palazzo Vecchio, the Piazza di Signorelli in Florence, Italy, where I will be doing a series of videos here for the next several days. Today we're going to talk about whether or not the Papal States were good for the Catholic Church. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut erat in principio et nunc et semper in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Sorry if the audio is not the best and the lighting, but this is what happens when you record live. Check out the videos I did in Chicago. I did some videos in Chicago as well live. So the Papal States. Okay, so if you're not familiar with history, when the Roman Empire fell, actually previous to that, Constantine moved the capital from Rome, which was kind of falling apart with the invasions of the barbarians, over to Byzantium, which was renamed Constantinople because it was the richer part of the empire. And so after the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, which is about 150 years after Constantine died, Rome kind of became a backwater. This was the Dark Ages, so to speak. And the problem with Rome and the Bishop of Rome being under the influence of different tribes that were invading was that you don't want the papacy under the influence of a secular power. And so eventually, several hundred years later, the Frankish kings, really Pepin, who is the father of Charlemagne the Great, gave the papacy a parcel of land in the middle part of the boot of Italy. We call this the Papal States. And for about 1100 years, the Papal States existed from 750-ish to really the end of the creation, I should say, of the Kingdom of Italy, which was at 1870. Now, was this good or bad? So the good, of course, obviously, is that the papacy was protected. It had its own land. Therefore, it had its own diplomatic corps. It had its own army. It had its own public executioner, and so forth. And the Pope was the head of the Papal States. So it gave him protection. So in the event that, let's say, the Lombards, who invaded northern Italy, that's where you get the region of Milan's called Lombardy, were to come in, they could hold the Pope for hostage and pressure him to even change his beliefs, like going back to, let's say, 4th century Arianism, stuff like that. So it definitely protected the papacy. The problem with the Papal States is that it turned the Pope from just a spiritual leader to a spiritual and temporal leader, and many times this conflicted with each other. So you'll see cases, again, 750-ish to 1870 is quite a lot of history. You'll see, especially in the kind of late medieval and certainly in the high Renaissance era, the Papal States going to war with Siena, siding with different alliances in Italy or outside of Italy against different kingdoms. I mean, you look at, let's say, the Battle of Lepanto, the famous 1571 battle. That was part of the Holy League. The Papal States, of course, were aligned with Spain and Venice during that time. So the problem with that is when you're a temporal ruler, you're going to make decisions that might be good for the land of the Papal States, but maybe will undermine your role as the Bishop of Rome, the Vicar of Christ. And this is what you saw happen on several occasions in this 1,000-year period of the Papal States. And look, this doesn't go to papal infallibility, because papal infallibility is about the Pope being impeccable, and I should say the Pope not being able to err because of the protection of the Holy Spirit on faith and morals. But that's not to say that the Pope made tons of mistakes on secular issues. Absolutely. Absolutely he did. And he got his hands dirty on a lot of secular issues, namely war and treason and all these things. So eventually what happened was Italy was never a unified kingdom really until the king of Piedmont, which is the part where Turin's at, if you like Juventus soccer, decided to unify the peninsula, and Victor Emmanuel was the king. And so he got a couple of people famous, Count Cavour and Garibaldi, the general, and they came and they conquered all the different kingdoms of Italy. Many of them were under, it's totally fine, many of them were under the different rulers, like the Spanish ruler and Parma was its own ruler. Venetia was kind of controlled by the Austrians. And eventually they unified all of that into one kingdom. Now, I should tell you that Count Cavour and Victor Emmanuel and Garibaldi were all known to be very avowedly anti-Catholic. And so the new Kingdom of Italy, which was created really in the 1860s, but they were able to finally conquer Rome in 1870, it was very anti-clerical in nature. They put in a lot of legislation that was hostile to Catholicism. You saw this happen in Germany with the Kulturkampf a couple decades later. And Pope Pius IX, Pio Nino, great pope, he was a pope from like 1845 to 1873, right before Leo. He was pope during this time. He was imprisoned in the Vatican at this time. It was a very difficult time for the papacy. But eventually, Rome, the Papal States were conquered. And from about 1870 to 1929, Rome was controlled, the Vatican was controlled by the Kingdom of Italy. 1929, Mussolini had become ruler of Italy in the 20s, and he negotiated the Lateran Treaty, which essentially gave the papacy its own kingdom, Vatican City as we know it, the smallest country in the world. And so what did that do? That afforded independence to the Pope, which was something that he wanted all along. But instead of having a large swath of territory, he just had this little 0.58 square mile land. And so that's what we have today. So in closing, because I know it's hard to do a video over here because it's loud, were the Papal States good for the papacy? I would say overall it was not. It did offer protection, but it got our hands dirty and gave a lot of ammunition to enemies of the papacy. Say, oh, well, the Pope did this, the Pope did that, and so forth, and so it got our hands dirty. So the ancillary benefit of losing the Papal States is now the Pope, instead of having to be a religious leader and a temporal leader, could refocus on just being the religious leader of the entire church. And overall, that ends up being a good thing. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.